The kids called him Mr. Frank and thought he was just another retired grandfather who liked helping at the school. But when terror came to their classroom, they learned that some people retire from war, but war never retires from them. Welcome to True Human Tales. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden courage and protective instincts, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These moments of quiet heroism deserve to be remembered. Jefferson Elementary School sat on Maple Street like a beacon of childhood innocence, its red brick walls and cheerful playground echoing with laughter every morning. The school served 350 students from kindergarten through 5th grade, and for the past 8 years, Frank Rodriguez had been their guardian angel at the busiest intersection. Every weekday morning at 7:30 a.m. sharp, Frank positioned himself at the corner of Maple and 3rd Street with his bright orange safety vest, official crossing guard sign, and a smile that could melt winter snow. He was 72 years old, with silver hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the patient demeanor of someone who genuinely loved being around children. The kids adored him. They called him Mr. Frank and would race to tell him about lost teeth, new puppies, and upcoming birthday parties. Frank knew every child's name, remembered their siblings, and always had a pocket full of sugar-free candy for the shy ones who needed extra encouragement. "Morning, Emma. How's that science project coming along?" he'd call out to a 4th grader with her backpack. "Great, Mr. Frank. I'm building a volcano," she'd reply, beaming with pride. Frank had become part of the school's fabric. Teachers trusted him completely. Parents felt secure knowing their children had such a caring presence protecting them. Principal Martinez often said that Frank was worth his weight in gold, reliable, gentle, and absolutely devoted to student safety. What none of them knew was that Frank Rodriguez had spent 28 years with the Metropolitan Police Department's SWAT team, the last 12 as team commander. He'd led tactical operations in the city's most dangerous neighborhoods, coordinated responses to armed robberies, hostage situations, and active shooter scenarios. Frank had retired from SWAT 8 years ago after a school shooting in the neighboring district where his team had been called in too late. 3 children died that day, and Frank decided he'd rather spend his remaining years preventing tragedy than responding to it. So he became a crossing guard, trading his tactical gear for a safety vest and his rifle for a stop sign. Tuesday morning began like every Tuesday morning for the past 8 years. Frank arrived at his intersection at 7:15 a.m., 15 minutes early as always, and performed his usual safety check. Traffic patterns, sight lines, road conditions, habits from his SWAT days that served him well in civilian protection. He positioned his equipment methodically. Stop sign in dominant hand, whistle around neck, emergency radio clipped to his vest. His movements were precise, but appeared casual to any observer. What looked like routine was actually a tactical professional establishing overwatch position. The first wave of students arrived at 7:45 a.m., mostly 5th graders who walked to school alone or in small groups. Frank knew each of them by name and family situation. Sarah Martinez, whose mother worked double shifts at the hospital. Tommy Chen, whose father deployed overseas 6 months ago. Jessica Williams, who lived with her grandmother. "Good morning, Mr. Frank," they'd chorus as he safely guided them across the intersection. "Morning, soldiers," Frank would reply with military precision disguised as grandfatherly affection. "Ready for another day of learning?" Between 8 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. came the heavy traffic, parents dropping off younger children, school buses, and commuters rushing to work. This was when Frank's tactical training became most valuable, though no one realized it. He read vehicle approaches and positioned himself to maximize protection. Frank had never told anyone about his SWAT background. The school's background check had revealed only that he was a retired police officer with an exemplary record. The classified details were need to know. He preferred it that way. Frank had seen enough violence for several lifetimes. At Jefferson Elementary, his biggest concern was usually making sure 2nd grader Marcus tied his shoelaces or reminding kindergartner Sophie to look both ways even when Mr. Frank was watching. Tuesday, November 15th, started with crisp autumn air and the usual parade of children bundling up in jackets and scarves. Frank arrived early as always, but something felt different. Not wrong, exactly, but different. His SWAT instincts were like old injuries. They ached when weather changed. He conducted his morning safety assessment with slightly more attention than usual. Traffic patterns normal, no unusual vehicles in the area. School grounds secure and well lit. Staff arriving on schedule. Everything appeared routine, but Frank's enhanced situational awareness remained elevated. The first wave of students arrived right on time. Sarah Martinez ran up with excitement, her breath visible in small puffs of cold air. "Mr. Frank, guess what? Mom said she might be able to come to my school play next week." "That's wonderful news, mija," Frank replied, using the Spanish endearment he'd learned growing up in the same neighborhood. "She's going to be so proud of you." As more children arrived, Frank fell into his familiar rhythm. Stop traffic, guide children safely across, exchange morning greetings, check for backpack zippers and untied shoes. Repeat. It was meditation in motion, a peaceful routine that had helped heal wounds most people couldn't see. Around 8:15 a.m., Frank noticed a white van parked across the street. Not unusual for the neighborhood, but the vehicle hadn't been there yesterday. Old habits made him note the license plate number automatically. The van's windows were tinted darker than standard, and it was positioned with a clear view of the school's main entrance. Frank's tactical training whispered warnings, but he'd learned to distinguish between paranoia and professional awareness, probably a parent running errands or a contractor waiting for a job site to open. Nothing that required action, just information to file away. At 8:25 a.m., the final group of students hurried past, the ones who were always running slightly late, usually accompanied by equally hurried parents. Frank helped the last kindergartner safely across and was preparing to pack up his equipment when he heard something that changed everything. The sound came from inside Jefferson Elementary, not the usual morning bustle of children and teachers, but something that made Frank's blood run cold. It was faint but unmistakable to someone with his training, the sharp crack of gunfire, followed by screaming. Frank's transformation was instantaneous and complete. 28 years of tactical training overrode 8 years of peaceful routine in a heartbeat. His breathing slowed, his vision sharpened, and his mind shifted into the hyper-aware state that had kept him alive in the city's most dangerous operations. He keyed his emergency radio with practiced efficiency. "This is Crossing Guard Rodriguez at Jefferson Elementary. Shots fired inside the building. Multiple shots fired. I'm going in." The dispatcher's voice crackled back immediately. "Frank, negative. Wait for backup." "SWAT is en route, ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Frank knew exactly what could happen in 12 minutes when armed attackers had access to 350 children and staff. He'd responded to scenes where seconds meant the difference between tragedy and rescue. Frank looked at the school building where moments ago he'd been watching children laugh and play. Now those same children were trapped inside with people who meant them harm. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "Dispatch, I'm former SWAT Commander Francisco Rodriguez Santana, badge number 2847. I have tactical training and I'm going in." Children are in immediate danger. Frank stripped off his crossing guard vest and reached into his equipment bag for items he'd hoped never to need again. A tactical knife, zip tie restraints, and something else that made his hands shake slightly. His retired service weapon, a Glock 22 that he'd maintained religiously despite hoping never to draw it again. Frank moved toward Jefferson Elementary with tactical precision that felt as natural as breathing. He'd studied the building's layout during 8 years of morning duty, noting entry points, sight lines, and security vulnerabilities with the automatic awareness of someone trained to assess tactical environments. The main entrance was chaos. Teachers evacuating younger children through emergency exits while others remained inside, presumably barricaded with students in secure classrooms. Frank could hear continued gunfire from inside the building, concentrated in the main hallway near the administrative offices. Frank approached using cover and concealment techniques perfected in urban combat scenarios. He reached the side entrance used by staff and maintenance, a door he'd observed every morning but never needed to access. His knowledge of the school's daily routine told him this entrance would be unlocked during morning hours. Inside the building, Frank's enhanced hearing distinguished between different types of sounds: gunfire, at least 2 weapons, possibly 3, adult voices shouting commands, children crying, and the distinctive sound of someone attempting to breach locked classroom doors. Frank moved through the school's corridors using techniques that hadn't changed in 8 years of retirement. Sound discipline, tactical breathing, cover-to-cover advancement. Each step brought him closer to the source of gunfire and closer to a confrontation he'd hoped never to face again. The attackers were concentrated in the main hallway, attempting to breach classroom doors where teachers had barricaded themselves with students. Frank could see 3 figures in dark clothing, all armed, moving with coordination that suggested planning but not professional military training. Frank positioned himself for maximum tactical advantage. Good cover, multiple escape routes, clear fields of fire that wouldn't endanger children. Then he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. "Police! Drop your weapons!" Frank's command voice echoed through the hallway with authority that came from nearly 3 decades of tactical operations. The attackers spun toward his position, weapons raised, and Frank's muscle memory took over. His first shots were precise, controlled, designed to neutralize threats without overpenetration that might endanger civilians. 2 attackers down immediately, the third seeking cover behind a water fountain. The remaining gunman opened fire wildly, his shots high and panicked. Frank's response was surgical, the kind of precision shooting that had made him legendary among SWAT teams across 3 counties. The threat was neutralized in seconds. Frank immediately began clearing the area, checking each downed attacker to ensure they were no longer a danger. Then he began the process he'd done dozens of times before, securing the scene and accounting for civilians. "This is Frank Rodriguez. Jefferson Elementary is secure. 3 subjects down. Building clear. I need medical response for possible casualties." Classroom doors began opening cautiously as teachers recognized Frank's voice. Children who had been terrified moments earlier began emerging from their hiding places, many of them recognizing their crossing guard, despite the completely different context. "Mr. Frank?" whispered Sarah Martinez, peeking out from her 4th-grade classroom. "Is it safe now?" Frank holstered his weapon and knelt down to her level, his voice returning to the gentle tone she knew. "Yes, mija, it's safe." Mr. Frank made sure of that. 12 minutes later, SWAT teams arrived at Jefferson Elementary to find the situation completely resolved. Frank sat on the front steps, his tactical equipment secured, giving his statement while medical teams checked students and staff. Detective Sarah Walsh had known Frank during his SWAT days and stared at him with disbelief. "Frank Rodriguez Santana, I should have known. How long have you been working here?" 8 years, Frank replied quietly. "Been the crossing guard since I retired." "And nobody knew?" Frank looked at the children being reunited with their parents. "They knew I was their crossing guard. That's all they needed to know." Principal Martinez approached with tears in her eyes. "Frank, I don't understand. I was SWAT commander for 28 years before I became your crossing guard. But today, I was just doing what I've always done, keeping the children safe." The FBI arrived within an hour to process the scene. The attackers were identified as part of a domestic extremist group that had been planning the attack for months. Their intelligence had failed to identify Frank's presence as a security factor. Special Agent Jennifer Chen reviewed Frank's service record with amazement. "Sir, your response was textbook perfect. 0 civilian casualties, threats neutralized with surgical precision. You probably saved hundreds of lives today." Frank nodded but didn't smile. "That's what we're trained for." The story broke on national news within hours. Retired SWAT commander, working as school crossing guard, stops armed attack. But Frank refused all interview requests. He'd spent 8 years trying to forget the weight of tactical decisions. The next morning, Frank returned to his intersection at 7:30 a.m. sharp, wearing his orange safety vest and carrying his stop sign. Some of the children looked at him differently now, not with fear, but with a new understanding that their Mr. Frank was someone special. Emma Thompson, a 3rd grader who'd been in the school during the attack, ran up to him with a drawing. "I made this for you, Mr. Frank." The picture showed a figure in an orange vest with the words, "My hero," written in purple crayon. Frank knelt down to her level, his eyes misting slightly. "Thank you, sweetheart. But you know what? You were very brave yesterday, too. You listened to your teacher and stayed safe. And that's the most important thing." As the morning progressed, more children arrived with cards, drawings, and hugs for their crossing guard. Parents stopped to shake his hand and thank him. The community had learned that their quiet crossing guard was something extraordinary, but Frank had learned something too. He'd spent 8 years thinking he'd left his protective instincts behind. Yesterday had shown him that some callings never really end. They just find new ways to serve. Frank Rodriguez continued working as Jefferson Elementary's crossing guard for 3 more years before finally retiring at age 75. The intersection where he'd stood was renamed Frank Rodriguez Way in his honor, though he'd insisted they keep his first name only. He never spoke publicly about his SWAT career or the events of that November morning. When reporters asked, he'd simply say that he was a crossing guard who'd done his job. But the children knew better. They understood that Mr. Frank was the kind of person who would always stand between them and danger, whether he carried a stop sign or something more serious. Sometimes heroes don't retire from service. They just find new ways to protect the people they care about. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the neighborhood is the elderly crossing guard with the gentle smile and the stop sign, carrying skills and courage that most people can't imagine. Frank Rodriguez had tried to leave his warrior days behind, but when children needed protection, he remembered that some things are worth fighting for. A school full of innocence, the right of children to feel safe while learning, the promise that good people will always stand between evil and those who cannot protect themselves. That's the most important lesson of all. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Frank? Someone who seemed like just a kind neighbor until the moment they revealed the depths of their courage and training? Someone whose quiet presence made you feel safer without knowing why? Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And share their story with us. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they are. We publish human stories that matter every single week. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the person helping children cross the street safely is exactly who you need when the world goes dangerous.